Donald Trump had always been a figure who thrived on the weight of his own words. When he took the stage, he knew how to command attention, and he understood the power of shaping narratives that people would carry with them long after the rally ended. On this day, the focus of his rhetoric turned toward Barack Obama. Trump didn't frame his words as a casual remark or a fleeting thought. He leaned into them with that familiar tone of suspicion that made his supporters lean closer, waiting for the punch. He asked a question that hung heavier than his usual critiques. Does he even live by the morals he talks about? Where does he really stand when it comes to faith? It wasn't just an attack on policy or leadership, it was a challenge to character, one of the sharpest tools in politics. The crowd reacted in a mix of laughter, applause, and murmurs. Some nodded as if he had confirmed what they already believed, while others shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that Trump had crossed into deeply personal territory. The stage lights reflected off his expression, showing a man who thrived on putting his opponents on the defensive by questioning Obama's morals. Trump wasn't just trying to diminish his rival's credibility, he was inviting the public to doubt the very foundation of his integrity. For Trump, it was strategy, but for those listening, it was a seed planted in the mind, a doubt that could grow. Barack Obama's name had always stirred strong reactions in Trump's world. From the early days when he had pushed questions about Obama's background, to the years when he criticized his policies, Trump treated him as a kind of personal measuring stick. In his rallies, invoking Obama's name guaranteed a response from the crowd, but questioning his morals, suggesting he didn't live by the principles he claimed, was something that shifted the game. It wasn't just political anymore. It touched on faith, on character, on the kind of compass that guides a person in private as much as in public. For many, morality and faith weren't just private matters, they were symbols of trustworthiness. By challenging whether Obama embodied those values, Trump was tapping into something deeper than political disagreement. He was trying to cast doubt on whether Obama could even be trusted as a man. The audience's reaction reflected that weight. Some felt emboldened, as if Trump had voiced a suspicion they hadn't dared to speak. Others were unsettled, sensing that the line between political theater and personal attack had blurred in a way that could not be easily undone. What made the moment more striking was the way Trump framed the question. He didn't shout it. He didn't turn it into a slogan. Instead, he let it drop into the air with a quiet bite, as though it were an obvious truth waiting to be recognized. He thrived on these moments, throwing out words that lingered, words that would be replayed on television and debated in households. He knew how to plant questions that had no easy answers, and by targeting Obama's morals, he ensured that the conversation wouldn't stop when the rally ended. The media, of course, seized on it. Clips of Trump questioning Obama's morals ran across networks framed by pundits who argued over whether the remark was sharp strategy or reckless provocation. Supporters praised Trump for being bold enough to say what others wouldn't. Critics accused him of lowering the tone of political discourse once again. But no matter where people stood, the question remained in the air. Was this just political banter, or was Trump pointing at something larger? For Obama, the weight of the remark didn't just come from Trump's words, it came from the echo of them. He had always understood that politics was more than debates about policies. It was about narratives, about who could hold the moral high ground in the eyes of the public. Trump's question threatened to tilt that ground. Even those who respected Obama could not ignore the sting of being asked if his morals were real, or merely words. In that moment, Trump had done more than launch a typical attack. He had placed Obama's character under a spotlight, forcing people to think about whether the man they admired truly embodied the values he spoke of. It was a challenge that reached beyond politics, striking at the core of trust, integrity, and faith. And while Trump may not have realized it fully then, the ripple of that question was about to set the stage for an answer he never expected. Would you like me to now expand Keynote 2 in the same 700-word storytelling style, keeping Barack Obama's response with the Bible quote at the center? When Barack Obama first heard about Trump's remarks, it wasn't through a staged confrontation or a debate hall filled with cameras. It came quietly, almost incidentally, as aides briefed him on the headlines making the rounds. The words had been simple enough, yet heavy. Trump had openly questioned whether he truly lived by the morals he so often spoke about, and whether his faith was genuine or merely political performance. Obama, never one to overreact in the face of provocation, listened with that calm, measured expression he was known for. He didn't jump to defend himself with long speeches or fiery rebuttals. Instead, he paused, tapped the table with his fingers, and thought. Those around him had seen this look before. It was the expression of a man weighing not just what to say, but how to say it in a way that resonated beyond the noise of politics. Obama understood that when someone like Trump raised questions about morality, it wasn't just an attack on him, it was a message meant for the people watching. And so, he knew his response couldn't be about trading barbs. It had to go deeper, to reach the heart of the matter in a way that left no room for doubt. Later that day, when a reporter asked him directly what he thought of Trump's words, Obama didn't rush to answer. The room quieted as cameras rolled, waiting for him to strike back. But instead of delivering a sharp retort, he opened a small notebook he carried with him. Inside there were notes, quotes, and verses he often jotted down for reflection. He glanced at the page and then looked up, his voice calm but firm. He recited, "What does it profit a man to gain the whole world, yet lose his soul?" The silence that followed was unlike the usual chatter of press conferences. For a brief moment, the words seemed to still the air. Reporters exchanged glances, aware that what had just been said wasn't the typical political answer. It wasn't spin. It wasn't defense. It was something that cut past the surface of Trump's jab and went straight to the heart of what morality and faith meant. Obama didn't elaborate. He didn't explain who the verse was aimed at, nor did he try to lecture. He simply let the words stand, knowing they carried their own weight. The power of Scripture, spoken in such a deliberate and unshaken tone, created an effect no lengthy speech could have matched in that single line. He had answered Trump's challenge while also raising a larger question, back toward him and toward anyone who equated success solely with power or wealth. Within hours, the moment spread across news outlets and social media. Clips of Obama calmly quoting the verse began circulating, drawing reactions from every corner. Some were struck by the humility of the gesture. Others saw it as a subtle but piercing rebuke, directed at Trump himself. It didn't matter whether people were religious or not. The verse had a universal sting. It asked a question not only of Trump, but of everyone listening. What are you truly chasing? And at what cost? For Trump, the response was not what he expected. He was accustomed to sparring with opponents who matched his energy, who fought back with words as sharp as his own. But Obama's response wasn't about trading blows. It was about shifting the ground entirely. By quoting Scripture, Obama had refused to play Trump's game. Instead, he reframed the conversation in terms that reached beyond politics, into the realm of conscience. Observers noted how unusual it was to see Trump unsettled by a single sentence. His silence in the immediate aftermath said more than words could have. Commentators replayed the moment, pointing out how the line seemed to hover over Trump's challenge like a mirror, reflecting the question back onto him. Obama's response didn't accuse, it didn't insult, it simply invited everyone to consider whether ambition, power, and wealth were worth the loss of one's moral compass. The impact lingered longer than most exchanges in the political arena. For many, the moment was remembered not for the provocation, but for the answer. Obama's choice to reach for a verse instead of a weapon of rhetoric stood out as both disarming and powerful. It was a reminder that sometimes the sharpest response doesn't come from shouting louder, but from speaking with clarity that leaves no room for denial. Trump had asked whether Obama lived by the morals he claimed. Obama's response was not a defense of himself, but a demonstration. By choosing to respond with Scripture that questioned the very nature of success without integrity, he showed that his faith was not something to be flaunted, but something to be lived even in the face of public challenge. And in that single verse, he managed to leave a lasting impression that no headline could fully capture. Do you want me to move forward and expand Keynote 3 in the same way? 700-word storytelling, Trump's unexpected silence and unsettled reaction. The moment Barack Obama's words reached Donald Trump, those around him noticed an unusual stillness. Trump was a man known for his speed of response, for his ability to fire back within seconds, whether through a sharp remark at a rally or a rapid tweet designed to dominate the news cycle. Silence was not his style. It was not in his nature to leave any challenge unanswered. But when Obama quoted the verse, "What does it profit a man to gain the whole world, yet lose his soul?" Trump hesitated. That hesitation was noticed immediately. Reporters scrambled for a reaction, expecting the usual counterattack. Supporters leaned in, waiting for him to dismiss Obama's words as hollow, or to twist them into another jab. Yet, instead of the confident smirk or the dismissive laugh he often used, Trump's face carried a flicker of something few had seen before: discomfort. For a man who built his image on being unshakable, the absence of an immediate retort was striking. Even his closest advisors seemed caught off guard, as though they too were waiting for him to fill the silence with one of his trademark comebacks. The reason for the pause was not obvious to the crowd, but it was there. Obama hadn't engaged in political sparring. He hadn't given Trump a soundbite to mock. Instead, he had offered a question rooted in Scripture, a line that carried weight beyond politics. Trump, who prided himself on always having the upper hand, now found himself confronted not with an insult to deflect, but with a mirror reflecting something deeper. To dismiss it outright would make him appear callous, while to acknowledge it would mean admitting it struck a nerve. That silence grew louder as commentators filled the void. News anchors replayed the clip of Obama's .com delivery, contrasting it with Trump's uncharacteristic quiet. Analysts began to speculate. Was Trump shaken by the words themselves, or was he calculating how to respond without appearing weakened? For a man who thrived on control of the narrative, it was a rare moment where the story seemed to control him. Among his supporters, reactions were mixed. Some brushed off the verse as irrelevant, arguing that politics was no place for Scripture, but others admitted quietly that the line had stayed with them. They replayed it in their minds. questioning whether the pursuit of power could really be separated from the question of integrity. Trump had succeeded in raising doubts about Obama's morals, but Obama had answered in a way that made people think about Trump's own. Asterisk behind closed doors? The silence lingered even longer. Advisors reportedly urged him to strike back, to take control of the conversation before it spread further. Yet even in private, Trump seemed unsettled. He was a man who loved the appearance of strength, but this was different. The words "lose his soul" were not easily brushed aside. They touched on something beyond wealth, fame, or power, things that had defined him his entire life. It was not the kind of question he could laugh off at a rally. Asterisk for Obama. The silence that followed his quote was confirmation of its impact. He hadn't expected Trump to suddenly admit defeat or change his ways, but the lack of an immediate attack spoke volumes. Obama knew the strength of allowing words to linger, of letting a single idea echo until it grew larger than the noise around it. In politics, moments like that were rare, and this one had landed exactly as intended. Asterisk the press continued to amplify the silence. Editorials appeared in newspapers, noting how unusual it was for Trump to falter in his rapid-fire style. Commentators suggested that the verse had forced him to stop and think in a way no insult ever could. Others argued that the pause revealed not reflection but strategy, a calculation of how to spin the moment to his advantage. Yet beneath all the speculation, one truth remained. For a man who lived on quick responses, the delay was undeniable. Asterisk that silence itself became the story. People who might not have paid attention to the initial exchange found themselves drawn into it because of Trump's uncharacteristic hesitation. In their eyes, it wasn't just about Obama quoting scripture, it was about Trump, the man who never paused, suddenly caught without words. The shock wasn't in the verse alone, it was in watching him unsettled by it. Asterisk even weeks later, the memory of the moment lingered. Supporters and critics alike remembered how the words had hung in the air, unanswered. The verse had not only silenced Trump in the moment, it had planted a question that outlasted the exchange. It was a reminder that sometimes the most powerful response isn't the one spoken loudly, but the one that leaves the other side unable to speak at all. Do you want me to now expand Keynote 4 in the same way? 700-word storytelling style, focusing on the impact beyond politics and how it resonated widely. The impact of Barack Obama's response reached far beyond the initial exchange with Donald Trump. What began as a sharp question at a rally, Trump asking whether Obama truly lived by the morals he preached, transformed into something larger than a political skirmish. Once the verse was spoken, "What does it profit a man to gain the whole world, yet lose his soul?" was not just an answer, it became a reflection that audiences everywhere were forced to wrestle with. For many, it was no longer about who won or lost an argument. It was about what the argument revealed about the pursuit of power, success, and integrity. Asterisk, the reaction among ordinary people was telling. Social media platforms filled with posts quoting the verse, often paired with Obama's calm delivery. Teachers used it in classrooms to spark conversations about values, while pastors mentioned it in sermons to remind their congregations that faith was not confined to Sunday mornings. Even those with little interest in religion found themselves discussing the idea that chasing the whole world's rewards might not be worth the price of one's soul. By simply quoting scripture, Obama had shifted the conversation away from politics into something far more universal. Asterisk for Trump, the ripple effect was difficult to manage. He was used to controlling the narrative by moving quickly, distracting from one story with another, and keeping the spotlight fixed firmly on his terms. This time, the story resisted that pattern. Every attempt to move forward seemed pulled back by the weight of that unanswered question. His critics highlighted the silence that followed, using it as evidence that he had been caught off guard. His supporters, though loyal, found themselves grappling with the verse itself, which didn't directly mention Trump, but seemed to hang over him like a shadow. Asterisk commentators across networks pointed out that Obama's use of the verse wasn't just clever, it was strategic in a way that avoided the pitfalls of traditional political sparring. Instead of escalating the conflict, he had de-escalated it while simultaneously elevating the conversation. He didn't have to accuse Trump of greed or selfishness. The scripture carried those implications on its own. It was a move that reminded many why Obama had long been seen as someone who chose words carefully, using them less as weapons and more as instruments to provoke thought. Asterisk what made the impact even stronger was how it highlighted the contrast between the two men. Trump's brand had always been about winning, gaining, and projecting strength through dominance. Obama's response, by contrast, was about restraint, reflection, and moral grounding. The juxtaposition was striking, and people couldn't help but notice how differently they approached the question of leadership. For some, the moment crystallized why they admired Obama. For others, it forced an uncomfortable comparison with Trump. Asterisk, the conversation spread into communities that usually stayed away from political debate. In coffee shops, workplaces, and family gatherings, people repeated the verse and debated its meaning. Some argued it was a direct challenge to Trump's character. Others said it was a reminder to everyone about the dangers of letting ambition override conscience. The fact that it could be read both ways gave it even more staying power. Unlike a typical political attack, which fades with the next news cycle, this moment lingered because it asked a timeless question. Even within political circles, the aftermath was unusual. Lawmakers, journalists, and strategists recognized that Obama's choice to respond with scripture had turned the tables. It made it harder for Trump to fight back without appearing dismissive of faith itself. Some of his allies tried to spin the moment as irrelevant, but the verse was too deeply embedded in cultural memory to be brushed aside. It was not just a line from the Bible, it was a moral challenge that had been delivered with precision and .com. Obama himself did not dwell on the matter. He moved on with his usual schedule, rarely commenting further. That restraint only added to the effect. By not repeating or defending his response, he let the moment speak for itself. People interpreted the silence as confidence, as though he knew the words had landed exactly as intended. Meanwhile, Trump's attempts to regain footing only underscored how much the exchange had unsettled him. The legacy of the encounter wasn't measured in poll numbers or campaign points. It was measured in the way it continued to echo long after the headlines faded. Years from now, people would remember that one man tried to question another's morals. And the reply was not anger, but a verse that carried a weight of its own. In a political landscape defined by noise, the simplicity of that response stood out all the more. For many, the lesson was clear. Politics could spark arguments, but moments of moral clarity could transcend them. Obama's calm use of scripture had shown that sometimes the most profound responses aren't about defending oneself, but about inviting everyone else to pause and consider what truly matters. Trump had sought to question Obama's faith and integrity. But in doing so, he had opened the door for a reminder that reached far beyond either of them, touching on a truth that outlived the moment itself. Do you also want me to expand? The ending statements in 500 words in the same style, bringing the whole story to a close without headings. In the end, what began as a sharp question at a rally turned into something neither side could have fully predicted. Donald Trump had raised doubts about Barack Obama's morals, framing his words as a challenge not only to his character but to his faith. It was a line of attack designed to stir, to unsettle, to create the kind of headlines that kept conversations alive long after the lights of the stage dimmed. But the answer that came did not follow the familiar script of political combat. Obama had not lashed out. He had not engaged in the volley of insults that often defined exchanges between rivals. Instead, he reached for something timeless, a verse that carried more weight than any political slogan could hold. What does it profit a man to gain the whole world, yet lose his soul? The simplicity of that response was what made it powerful. It asked a question that no poll could measure, and no campaign could spin away. It wasn't aimed at Trump alone, it was a challenge for anyone listening to consider what truly mattered in life. In politics, moments are often fleeting, but this one lingered. It reminded people that beyond the noise, beyond the rallies, beyond the headlines, there are questions of conscience that refuse to fade. Obama's calm delivery contrasted so sharply with Trump's typical fire that the exchange stood out as more than a clash between two men. It became a moment that symbolized two very different approaches to leadership and values. For Trump, the silence that followed was a rare and telling moment. A man who thrived on words, who built his brand on never being caught speechless, had been met with something he could not easily counter. His hesitation became part of the story, and even though he tried to move past it, the image of that pause stayed with people. It wasn't a sign of weakness to some, but it was undeniably out of character, and that alone made it memorable. For Obama, the significance lay not in scoring a point, but in reminding the public of something larger than politics. His decision, not to argue, not to defend himself with long explanations, but to let scripture speak for him, was itself a demonstration of the values he was accused of lacking. The verse was not only a reply, it was a living example of the kind of moral grounding he wanted to be associated with. As the dust settled, what endured was not the clash of personalities but the weight of the question that hung in the air. The world is filled with people chasing power, wealth, and recognition. But in the quiet aftermath of that exchange, many were reminded of the cost that comes with forgetting the soul in the process. Obama's words traveled far beyond the press, conferences, and the rallies. They settled into conversations among families, communities, and individuals who saw in them a reflection of their own choices and values. The story did not end with a winner or loser declared on stage. It ended with a lingering sense that sometimes the sharpest battles are not fought with volume, but with clarity. Trump had sought to question Obama's morals. Obama had answered by holding up a mirror that forced everyone, Trump included, consider what it means to gain the world, yet lose what truly matters. And that was why the moment refused to fade. Would you like me to compile all 4 keynote expansions plus the ending into one continuous full-length story so you can have